once we realized we had something special, we said, this is going to be the way we're going to grow our business. And it turned out that if we could not only act that way in terms of how we treated our own employees, if we could then articulate to the marketplace that we are doing something special and they could actually feel that uniqueness, that they were willing to pay a premium price for what we did. So we were in some cases 20 to 30% more expensive than our competitors, and yet we were to 5 to 6 times more profitable than they were in a commodity
Yeah.
business. And when I arrived there, many of their senior leaders said, what are you doing here? We've had 15 years of Wall Street growth. What do we need this culture thing for? And I used to have to go to these board meetings and prove that this stuff made sense and it wasn't just the right thing to do. It's not just the right thing to do. It's good for business. Call center companies, if you looked at it, talked to financial people at the time when I sold my business, would say, well, you're probably valued at 3 to 5 times EBITDA. And I ended up selling the business for 22 times EBITDA.
Yeah.
Well, how did that happen? That happened because we told a story. That happened because of our culture. It happened because we built something that was special.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of The Freedom Experience. Today, we have Paul Spiegelman on the show. Paul is the co-founder of the Small Giants community and the CEO of Beryl Health, a business that grew by focusing not just on profit, but on creating a culture where employees come first. In this episode, Paul shares how recognizing the uniqueness of Beryl's culture became the secret to their success, allowing them to charge 20 to 30% more than their competitors and still be 5 to 6 times more profitable. He also reflects on a pivotal moment when he realized that treating employees well not only built loyalty, but also became the foundation of their competitive edge in what was a commodity industry. Paul dives into leadership lessons, including the humility of knowing when your business might need someone to take the helm to take it to the next level. And he discusses how even if you're not planning to sell, engaging with potential investors can provide invaluable insights by revealing the gaps in your business, things that you might not otherwise be aware of. Toward the end of this conversation, Paul reveals how storytelling and culture helped Beryl achieve a 22 times EBITDA valuation during its sale, far above the market average of around 6-7. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Paul opens up about dealing with doubt, cold feet during the private equity negotiations, and the mental health challenges that followed his exit. So this episode is packed with invaluable insights on culture, on leadership, and balancing purpose with profit. Whether you're a leader trying to grow a meaningful business or someone seeking purpose beyond your exit, Paul's story will inspire and challenge you. So sit back, relax, and let's jump into my conversation with Paul Spiegelman. Paul, welcome to the show.
Great to be with you, John.
So I thought to start today with my curiosity around your sense of purpose. You grew a business, Beryl Health, over the years from around the 80s. I think it had its roots around 84, 85. And I was really curious about where the strong sense of purpose came into the picture for you.
Well, I think we're always still searching for a purpose, right? You aged me by talking about when my business started. So it's been a long time and the search continues, right? I mean, do we even at a young age think about purpose and values and all of that? Or if we are thinking about it, we probably can't identify it as that, right? But my brothers and I did start a business in the mid 80s. I was 27 at the time. We started off in the medical alert business, like those commercials that some people in the US would see, I've fallen, I can't get up. That wasn't us, though. We never sold to the public. But we always wanted to do something together. We just didn't know what we would do or when we would do it. And that it evolved into what became Beryl Health, which was an outsourced call center business for hospitals all across the US. And what we did know is that we didn't want to build a business that would compete based on price. And when you think about call centers, they're really, low margin, price focused businesses, not known for culture or engagement. You think of the boiler room operation. We
Yeah.
knew we wanted to do something different. We wanted to build a place where people would enjoy what they did every day. We wanted to be able to charge a premium price for our services, but we didn't frame it as purpose. And I think it was really within the first couple of years when we maybe had 10 or 15 employees, and our employees would tell us that this was a great place to work. And we said, well, what makes it great? And they said, well, you seem to genuinely care about us. And we have events, we do things. It's kind of like a family. And we started to ask where they used to work. And then we heard these stories and how people were treated at these companies and realized that maybe we were doing something different. And the fact is, my brothers and I never really worked at other companies. So we didn't have frames of reference. We
Yeah.
weren't trying to do something different. It just seemed to be who we were. So though I became very passionate about employee engagement and culture, I think it came from our parents. I think my dad always used to say, always be kind, never burn a bridge, and treat people with respect. And so I think our folks raised us with just good values that we extended to how we treated our employees. And then when they told us that we were doing something unique, we latched on to that and said, okay, there's something special here. And that ultimately became our calling card. And I think that what's important to also realize is that there's a purpose for a business, if you can articulate it. And there's also a personal purpose and what fulfills uh, you going, in your life. And I think, again, those hopefully are aligned. They hopefully contribute to each other. But I think that's when I realized that what drove me was having a sense of purpose around the impact I could have on other people and their lives, as a way that would make me fulfilled in my life.
I think there came a point where you almost sort of formalized that through I think you called it your growth cycle, where employees came first, customers, and if you kind of flip this on its head, it just went in the wrong direction. And I think you talked about in your book a company who was a competitor of yours, who through private equity was struggling so much because of the sort of nature of the pressure that comes out of private equity. Instead of, I guess, focusing on employees first, then customers, and then ultimately creating a profitable business, they were trying to go the other way around, and it was just killing it.
Yeah. Actually, we called that the circle of growth, which I would love to take credit for, but it didn't come from me. We had really started to frame everything we did around our culture and engagement. And I remember hiring our first CFO, Pat, who looked at our books and they said, Paul, the first thing we can do to greater profitability is stop doing some of these events and fun things you were doing for the culture because that's really hurting our margins. And I, at the time, said, Pat, I don't know how to prove it to you, but I got to believe that there's a connection between how we treat our people and ultimately the financial results of the business. And a couple years later, he's visiting a client with me. We're on a drive, I think, Indiana, and he says, Paul, it just occurred to me after spending a couple of years here now, it's like a circle. If we focus first and foremost on our employees, gain their loyalty, that's going to drive customer loyalty. That customer loyalty then is going to drive profit into our business. And as a privately held company, in our case, without outside investors, we can return that profit to our people, giving them better tools and resources to do their jobs. And that circle just continues. So that's how we coined, or he coined, that phrase, which I really came to believe was true. And, the ability to do that also has to do with how your business is formed or whether you do have outside investors. I mean, in the early days, pretty early days, we tried to raise money, like many companies do. I remember trying to raise $1.5 million in $15,000 increments, and we raised $15,000, and that's all we could get. One friend of our dad's wrote us a check, and that was it. And so we went back to just putting our head down and working hard, and then ended up growing our business till the end without any outside capital. And that definitely contributed to the culture we built because we had the freedom to design and build the kind of culture we wanted. So it's not that one model is better than another, but when you do have outside investors in the business, you don't completely own the culture. You don't have the choice to always do it the way you want because they have a business model that may sometimes be in
Mm.
conflict with that.
And I always got the sense that you saw putting people first, and that people were the sort of secret to growth. Getting that right was the secret to growth. And again, I'm kind of curious, was that something that evolved over the time that you started to, as you had these conversations with employees who were coming from other environments, that this was something that, if you could get right, would turn out to be a competitive advantage for you to hold on to those higher margins and to grow a really healthy business?
No question about it. Look, like other entrepreneurs, we wanted to make money. We wanted to be successful. Once we realized we had something special, we said, this is going to be the way we're going to grow our business. And it turned out that if we could not only act that way in terms of how we treated our own employees, if we could then articulate to the marketplace that we are doing something special and they could actually feel that uniqueness, that they were willing to pay a premium price for what we did. So we were in some cases 20 to 30% more expensive than our competitors, and yet we were to 5 to 6 times more profitable than they were in a commodity
Yeah.
business. And
But
so
also
that
this,
that was just, but we were in a recurring revenue business. We had these, our customers, as I said, were these hospitals who just stayed with us for years. And so we could count on that recurring revenue coming in. And that just propelled our business to high margins and high growth for a company just started by three brothers in an 8 by 10 room. It's something that became absolutely intentional in terms of how we grew the business. And what we ultimately realized is that, as they say, you can do well and you can do good at the same time.
and I mean, you talk about growing the business, but I think when I first met you, there were maybe 400 people in the business. I guess it was around 2010, 11, somewhere around there. But there comes a point where you pull up the brake, where you put the brakes on growth, and you make this conscious decision to keep it small. But 400 odd people, how were you thinking about small at the time, and how did you sort of think about that in terms of size and where you wanted to put the brakes on?
Yeah. I'm not sure we ever really put the brakes on, John. We just realized that we were going to grow at a certain rate, and yeah, getting to about 400 people at the height. Not that we were a tiny business, certainly weren't huge, but that's a nice size business to grow. I think we grew to about 40 million in revenue at the time, and so we were purposeful about not caring about super fast growth. We
Yeah.
weren't working toward a specific exit or anything. I just wanted to build a great company that made a difference in the people's lives, that supported not only me and my family, but all of our employees and their families, and creating a great place to work that would sustain over a long period. I think that, as happens with any business over time, is our services do end up being in some way commoditized, right? It gets a little bit more competitive. People, your customers start realizing that, hey, I might be able to get this a little cheaper. We have to now start competing a little bit more based on cost. More companies started to see that they could do similar things. And so you have to start to adjust. And I think I saw on the horizon, the kind of clouds that were forming
Yeah.
that might have made it difficult to grow much beyond where we had grown. And I think if we're being honest with ourselves as leaders, and there's some humility to it, we have the capacity to grow our businesses to a certain level. And then it may be time for someone with even a different level of experience or a different goal for the business to kind of take over and grow from there. So having been in it, you know, I ultimately sold the business in 2012, but that was almost 30 years in the business. So it was really nice run. But I did feel like, okay, this is probably somebody else's to take to the next level.
You took a while to think, to sort of think through that process. I think the first time I remember reading about the sort of offers coming in is when you're around 270 odd people, 25 million in revenue, and you start to have the M&A folks knocking on the door, but you're very careful about how you approach things and not closing the door, listening. And tell us a little bit about what was going through your mind as in the early days of when private equity came knocking.
Yeah. Well, there's so many lessons in that whole period. The first of which is, I think it's okay to actually talk to people that are interested in your business, whether it's investing or buying your business, even if you have no interest in doing that. One, because it's a great learning opportunity. You understand how outsiders look at your business. And I always tried to run my business as if I did have investors. And so when those people came in and wanted to kick the tires and maybe put a value on it or make an offer, not that I answered every call, but I engaged some of them because I therefore established gaps in my business because I noticed that they might say something about our technology or our sales infrastructure or something. And I would go, I hadn't really noticed that. I'd pay more attention to that. So I ran the business as if I had investors, knowing that at some point, if an opportunity comes up that I want to take advantage of, I want to be in the best position possible. But I had also done something which I know is important to a growing business, which is building a bench and building a leadership team, and delegating appropriately so that ultimately I wasn't functionally responsible for the day-to-day operations of the business. And I had gotten to the point where my leadership team was really chomping at the bit to grow at a rate probably greater than I was comfortable with. And in order to keep them, I started to listen a little bit more to these outsiders and finally engaged an investment banker, put what they called the book together, and went out to the markets, I think in 2009, which wasn't a great time considering what had just happened with the
Yeah.
economy and all that. But I knew we had a good story. I knew we'd get interest. And sure enough, we got 20 offers from private equity firms primarily and for more money than I ever would have been able to spend, so I ended up signing a letter of intent to sell my company to a private equity firm in January of 2010, and then due diligence started, and during the due diligence period, I started to feel nervous and started to get cold feet, and remember, I've never been through anything like this before. But through the questions that they were asking, it all became very short-term focused. And I started to feel that maybe this really unique, special culture we created could be hurt down the road based on how this private equity firm or most private equity firms operate, which is to say that generally speaking, in some period of time, they're going to flip it to
Yeah.
something else. And that's how they pay back their investors. And I get that. But I ultimately felt that the legacy I would have and to fulfill my own purpose was to be able to look back and said, we built something really special here and that survived beyond me. And I felt that that was going to be at risk. And so with about 2 weeks to go, I walked away from that deal. And I was generally a hero for a moment with our employees because they knew what we were going through. I was transparent with them about the opportunity to grow at a greater rate in healthcare. But they loved the idea that I seemed to have made a decision to protect them. The one exception to that was that our leadership team, who all had a stake in the outcome financially with some some phantom equity shares, said, well, wait a minute, what about us? Right. And so I said, okay, don't worry about it. I'm going to sweeten the pot here. And although we don't know what's going to happen going forward or if we'll ever sell the company, if we do, you'll be rewarded for that. And so let's put a new plan together. I think at the time it was a 2014 plan, 3 or 4 year plan, and let's get back to work.
Yeah.
And I put my own money back in the company. I took on a line of credit for the first time after having no debt. I brought our profitability down by 50% at that time because I knew I wasn't answering to anybody else. I was going to reinvest in the business and this new journey to wherever that was going to take us.
So again, you aren't clear on where exactly you're going. But you've kind of been through this process with private equity, which was very useful in a way in that it identified gaps in technology and sales and marketing. I think I remember you telling me about the call with, was it Pam, the CEO, they were going to put in, and her saying, Paul, I don't know how we're going to hit these numbers, which ultimately, if it's going well, no problem. But when you're not hitting the numbers, then they start running the business for you. So you identify all these gaps that you're talking about, and you set to work on fixing a lot of them, I imagine, by reinvesting in the business. What were you thinking at the time? Was it just, I'm going to double down and make this better, or how were you thinking about it?
That's all I did. I really believed in what we were doing and the opportunity to grow. And I was listening to our leadership team who felt very confident. But for example, we didn't really have a sales team. We had me and one salesperson that had been with us for 26 years who was wonderful. But every effort, as many companies know, to add to the sales team is really hard. And we
Yeah.
tried a bunch of times, didn't really work. But to anyone that was coming in to a potentially invest or buy the business, that doesn't give them a lot of confidence that you're going to be able to scale that and truly grow the business at a greater rate going forward. And I wanted to see what our potential was. So I went out and brought in a real high powered sales leader who had run sales for a public company and allowed him to come in and build a team and build that infrastructure and to really see how that would go. And so I felt like, look, I had grown the business well over these years. I had, by that time, I was really on my own leading it because my older brother had left the business back in the year 2000. Our younger brother, unfortunately, had passed away from a brain tumor in 2005. It was just me and my Beryl team. I felt very confident in them and the ability to grow. I had uh, listened to mentors financially who said, as we started to make money after many years in business, like take some money off the table, start to build wealth personally. So I always felt like, what are my risks? If the place burns down, I'm going to be okay.
Yeah.
Let's just go for it. So we were just continuing on the journey with maybe just a little bit more risk at that time.
But you consciously surrounded yourself with mentors and advisors to kind of help you think about how to navigate growth properly. As you say, taking some money off the table, long-term wealth creation instead of just sort of short-term thinking and simply just reinvesting in the business. But you had surrounded yourself with this great team.
Well, like many people that are in our world, I had no experience. I wasn't a business person. I don't consider myself an entrepreneur even. That was my one gig was Beryl Health.
Yeah.
But I realized after a number of years working with my two brothers that we had like three chiefs in the kitchen and we were like a mom and pop business. And the only way for me to learn, I didn't, have an MBA or anything like that, was to just surround myself with really smart people, primarily mentors first, who were kind enough to give me their time and took an interest in what I was doing. And to this day, I have mentors like that help me understand what's going on around me, people that have much more experience than me, and that is just so valuable. I wasn't ever much for a big board or anything. I'm really good one to one. I love building one to one relationships with people I trust. So those mentors did then and continue to help me along the way.
Yeah, I think for me as well, that was where the small giants came in, is having this group of mentors around me when I was struggling and trying to sort of find my way through. Being able to lean on those people was so important. And sometimes I think there's ego and pride that holds you back. But as a Yeah, I eventually did an MBA, but as a business owner, it was like, I've got to do something to figure this out, and it was go off and do an MBA. But I think what was more valuable was that small giants group of folks who either introduced me to other people or who were there to lean on, and that was fantastic. And a lot of thanks goes to you for creating that community. It's been an invaluable part of my life.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, great to hear you say that. And, selfishly, I did that because I wanted to meet other people who felt like I did about business and life, that were purpose driven. And I mean, I've never been much of a networker. I'm pretty reserved. But if I could find other people that had the same sensibility, and they were practitioners, they weren't consultants, they were just in the fight, just like I was, and we could learn and grow together. That's what came after I read Bo Burlingham's book, Small Giants, and saw what made these companies special. And I looked at these leaders and I just said, God, I want to meet more people like that. And, after bugging Bo for a couple of years, we said, let's just start this community. And so we've been able to find and bring in and engage people like you who are just trying to figure it out along the way. And we just love sharing those stories. And that comes from just vulnerability and being genuine about this constant search for fulfillment and purpose, knowing that we're all figuring it out as we go. We don't really know what we're doing along the way. But if we can do that with other people that are going through the same experiences, it's a lot more comforting.
yeah, and I think that was one of the things that I found in the communities, that space to be vulnerable and to have those difficult conversations and to keep coming back year after year and continuing those relationships and continuing to have those conversations. So
Yeah,
yeah, it's been a fantastic journey. Past 15 years, I think it is. So
that's right. Yeah.
it's been
2010, we
amazing.
started it. Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing to celebrate, 15 years
Yes.
there. And what's happened, I think maybe back then it was even a little bit more unique to think of this idea of purpose and values driven as a business practice, right? Now it's a little bit more in vogue, and I'm not saying we're there yet that this is the standard way that business is done, but this idea of culture and engagement and looking at how the new generation of workers want to be treated, they want more than just money. They want to make the world a better place. They want to feel that they're having impact. They want to feel valued. And so these business practices are really resonating now in ways that we probably never imagined. And so it's nice to even enhance and bring more people into this community as we're all learning and growing together.
Yes, it's so great that you say that. I remember, I think, reading something that went along the lines of when you first started receiving those offers, like feeling like the three pigs with a wolf with a load of money kind of coming to blow the house down. And that wolf was focused on EBITDA, cash flow, tech infrastructure, that kind of stuff. And if I remember rightly, you had some, or you felt that there was more value tied up in the people and the culture and what you'd built. And if I'm hearing you right, you're starting to say that that is becoming more visible now. That we're we're actually being able to measure that more than we were back in those days. Is that
Yeah. Well, hey, I think it's really important to measure to the extent that we can. And I think that not only could I look at our overall profitability and compare that, our employee engagement scores that we measured, or our customer loyalty that we measured, or our profitability. But I said, is there data out there that makes this connection? Because there's a lot of leaders, that are still cynical about this and came from the more command and
yeah?
control style of leadership. And for many years that worked. But now that's changing, and we do have to be able to like sort of put our money where our mouth is and say, what's the return on that? And I remember when I ultimately sold my company to a big public company in healthcare, I became chief culture officer of that company, Stericycle, and I did that for 5 years. And when I arrived there, many of their senior leaders said, what are you doing here? We've had 15 years of Wall Street growth. What do we need this culture thing for? And I used to have to go to these board meetings and prove that this stuff made sense and it wasn't just the right thing to do. And I remember being able to show that in the case, for example, they had 200 locations in the US, where they measured employee engagement and customer loyalty. Well, it turned out that the top 10 most profitable locations happen to be the ones with the highest employee engagement scores, right? So I was always very conscious that there are people that are going to question all of this. But I think uh, business leaders are seeing that. You're seeing more written about this in books, and so we're understanding that it's not just the right thing to do. It's good for business. I call center companies, if you looked at it, talked to financial people at the time when I sold my business, would say, well, you're probably valued at 5 times, 3 to 5 times EBITDA. And I ended up selling the business for 22 times EBITDA.
Yeah.
Well, how did that
Right.
happen? That happened because we told a story. That happened because of our culture. It happened because we built something that was special, that ultimately was valued by a company that was willing to pay for that value, that thought that what we built was something that might be able to rub off on this big company. And maybe that's easier to do in a small privately held company. Of course, I get, and I realized after 5 years in this role at Stericycle that it's really hard to move a big ship, particularly when they're not hitting their numbers with Wall Street like they used to. So I'm not naive about the fact that there's many things at bay, but I think nowadays this is becoming a more accepted way to do business because you can see the financial results of concentrating first and foremost on the people in your business.
Yeah, which kind of brings me to something else you wrote about, which was, I think, the best model of this future American business is a smart, small, ethical company and making long-term investments in a loyal local workforce. How's that thinking evolved with the change in the way that we work, and that deep commitment or sort of connection with the community the way we all work virtually now?
Yeah, it's a great question, John, and I'm not sure I'm the expert on that or have all the answers, right? I mean, I now it's been 12 years since I sold that business where we all operated in a former Walmart facility and got together and hung out and and recruited locally and all of that. And I think that of course, there's some really good things about a remote or virtual workforce and the flexibility that provides not only to the company to be able to recruit from across the U.S. or even globally, but the fact that it offers the flexibility that many of our employees got used to post pandemic or during and now post pandemic, that they want that flexibility in their own lives to work a certain way. And I think that it's been shown that we can be productive, right? It can work.
Yeah,
And it seems that we're sort of settling on this hybrid, what we call hybrid. There's many forms of that as maybe the most preferred method. And I think as long as leaders focus on maintaining the sense of community, and whether that's bringing people together a few days a week, whether it's if you're fully remote, bringing everybody together quarterly. I mean, there's just nothing like being in person. No way.
yeah,
I mean, we can be on screens all day long. It's just not the same. And so I think it's just a question of how do we do it efficiently but maintain that personal touch with each other. And because we're not going back, right? I mean,
no,
it's not going to be the days where everybody's all in the same location. So we're all challenged with that. And I think there's practical tools and things that people are trying. Again, I'm not operating a business like that nowadays. So there's others that can speak better to it. But I think where I'm noticing as I observe, particularly small giants type companies, is they're finding a way to have that balance. And they're doing that not in a top down way, but they're listening to their employees and say, hey, what would you like? What would make you comfortable? And then balancing the fact that, maybe they used to all be in the same office and wanting to have people together because that can make the most productive work environment.
yeah. I kind of keep going back to that thought of Bo's, sort of Burlingham's walking into a business and feeling that mojo as you walk sort of down the corridors, and it does feel like, how do you rekindle that, or how do you find that in a virtual environment, and how do you build these great small businesses that you can still sort of feel that mojo in the virtual world in? And yeah, I think it's one of those questions we're all still trying to figure out an answer, but
Yeah, well, even when I had my call center business, which was in a suburb of Dallas, Texas, we served hospitals all over the U.S. And as you know, like when you come to Beryl Health, you walk in and you're just blown away by the place, right? The physical nature of it, just like how beautiful it is inside, the vibe you get, the smiles on people's faces and all. You can't duplicate that. And yet, some hospital in upstate New York is hiring us to handle calls from their community members, and we're charging this premium price. How do they know that? And so I used to send out like those American Airlines vouchers and say, just get on a plane, just come and see it. And they'd walk in the door and then they'd go, okay, now I get it, right? So we would literally pay for people to come tour. We tried to do video. Video didn't work as well as getting in person. So again, same idea. We're all creatures of community, and we're social, and we want to meet people. And so I just think it's up to every company and every leader to say, what's the best combination we can do while offering the flexibility that people want today.
That they've been looking for, yeah.
Yeah.
So you reinvest in Beryl, and it's a very short time afterwards that Stericycle approaches you. How did you? Yeah, I mean, it was within a year, correct? That
Yeah.
they came back.
Yeah. A year later, I get approached by this company, Stericycle. Never heard of them. They weren't in our business. Their actually primary business is medical waste disposal. And so they called us and I met with them and they said, we're interested in buying your company. And I said, well, why would you be interested in our company and what we do? And I came to learn. I mean, I'd never worked at a big company, let alone a public company, that public companies diversify and they get into new industries as a way to keep their value high for their shareholders. And they had identified patient communication as one of the areas that they were interested in. They had already invested in physician answering service companies and rolled a bunch of those up, and we never did that. But in this sort of hospital call center outsourcing world, this small niche, we were the largest company that did that. And they felt that we could be a platform play for them in growing this segment of this diversification for them. And so what I did in that first meeting, I said, I'm flattered. I said, but here's what happened. And I repeated all the things I just told you about how I put money in, I lowered the profit, I took a line of credit. I said, so from a valuation standpoint, it wouldn't even make sense to do anything right now. Let's keep talking. And they said, well, let us just take a look at your books and just give you some indication of what we think. I said, sure. They took a look at the books. And their first offer was well in excess of what the private equity firms were offering me. So this idea that, profitability and EBITDA had gone way down didn't really matter to them at the time because they saw the potential of this and they sort of kept at me. And at least that kept my attention. And so we kept talking, and it really took me a year. And ultimately what made me decide to sell the company to them was a conversation I had with their CEO when I met Charlie, who at the time wasn't CEO, but had just been nominated to be CEO. And he called, I went to Chicago, met him, and he said, Paul, I've heard so much about your company. He goes, I know we're talking to you about a deal. I don't know if we're going to get a deal done, but I've heard about this culture you've built. And he said, I'll be honest, we've been a Wall Street darling for years, done very well financially. We are very customer focused, but we've never looked at our employees as a key constituent in the business. And as the new incoming CEO, I want that to be my stamp on the company. I'd love to come learn from you. Can I come down to Beryl Health and kick the tires and
Love it.
see what you guys do? And I said, of course, I'd be honored. So he comes down, spends a couple days. And I said, man, this guy gets it. And not only might our company culture survive as part of this large company, but maybe what we've done in this small company could impact this big company. And that's when I decided to sell the company to Stericycle. And some might say, well, there's a risk there too. You're going to get swallowed up in this big company. But I had great trust in Charlie and his leadership team, and it turned out to be the best decision I ever made because it did survive. And I remember when he said to me a couple months later, said, Paul, so now what do you want to do? And like many entrepreneurs, like, well, I don't want to work for the man. I've been doing this for, so many years. I'm ready to do something different. I said, but guess what, Charlie? I'd like to be the chief culture officer of Stericycle. I said, I've never worked at a big company. I, in my heart, believe that the same principles around culture should work in any industry and in any size company. If you'll give me the opportunity, I'd love to do this at Stericycle. I said, and I don't want to be paid because you're going to give me the opportunity to do this experiment in a way that I've never done before. And you've treated me very well in terms of buying my company. And so he said, let's start Monday. And
Oh,
so
I hadn't
that's what I
realized that.
did. Yeah. So I did that for 5 years.
Wow.
And like I said, learned a lot of challenges. It's hard. But I still believe that employees at all levels all want the same thing. They want to feel that they're connected to the purpose of the company. They want to feel valued for the work that they're doing, and they want to feel like there's an opportunity to learn and grow. And so it was a great joy to do that in a big company setting for a change.
So that move was actually by choice rather than through sort of an earnout or had to be part of the new company. It was something you chose to do as an experiment.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, one of my mentors said to me years ago, Paul, if you ever sell, you sell for cash. You don't take stock in their company. You don't do an earnout and everything. And I remember when Charlie first brought our deal to his board, they said no. They thought it was too big of a price to pay. And he said he's never had a deal where they said no. And they do like 30 to 40 acquisitions a year. And so he said, but I'm not giving up. I'm going back to them in a month. And he called me 2 days before going back to them to try to re-engage. And he said, Paul, hey, before I go back, I just want to have in my back pocket, would you be open to doing an earnout? And I said, I don't know what gave me the confidence at that moment to say, Charlie, I'm really not. I'm going to stick to my guns here. It's not something I'm interested in doing because that voice in my head said, don't do it. I also had heard that public companies didn't focus on earnouts as much at that point. So I said no, and then he got it approved, and we were able to get the deal done. After that, they actually started doing earnouts for some companies, and I was able to sit on the other side of that. But yeah, I didn't have that, and I knew it wasn't my show anymore. I knew it would have been very difficult to, as people that have those financial arrangements. And again, there's nothing wrong with them. They're
Yeah.
quite typical. But I knew that I wouldn't have control over my own destiny there. And so I wasn't really interested in sort of a two bites of the apple arrangement that
Yeah.
many people do. So I was very fortunate to have it work out that way. But yeah, I to have this new kind of landscape, this blank canvas to allow me to try to do this work on a bigger stage and tell that story was definitely worth it for me.
And you do that for 5 years and then leave Stericycle. And what happens next? You've now sold the business. You've left Stericycle. Where are you there, sort of personally at that stage?
Yeah, well, I had started Small Giants Community in 2010, and so I sort of yearned for the small company world again, and so I just got more active in Small Giants. A couple years prior, we had brought on Hemsa Daher to be the executive director of Small Giants, and we had this new focus on what we call next generation
Yeah.
leaders and training them through our leadership academy. And I just was very engaged in that. So really, from a professional standpoint, most of my time was spent really supporting HEMSA and the growth of the community, which was really ultimately where my passion and my love was. But I will tell you that as many entrepreneurs experience, um, keeping that sense of purpose after you have an exit of that size, and maybe money is not an issue any longer, is always a challenge. And I had, again, good advice that before I ever sold my company, I had been thinking about what I would do next. I didn't go into that with nothing planned. I had Small Giants. I had another organization called the Beryl Institute I had started. I had been writing books and doing speaking engagements. So I had kind of a lot going on. But even after that, things start to wane a little bit. And when you've run an organization, and Beryl was really my baby, that was my one thing all those years. There were times that I did dip and felt like I was a little bit lost. I didn't have that sense of purpose along the way, and especially after I think I left Stericycle.
Because you've described Beryl as your family, the people, the staff, I guess, as family. Kind of,
Yeah.
you go home to family, but you go to work, and family were those folks at work. And I remember reading that in the stories in your book. But you opened up about dealing with depression at Small Giants, and I mean, for me, I kind of look at you as somebody who's very successful, gone through a big exit, and running this fantastic Small Giants community. But it's still something that grabs hold no matter who we are. How did you deal with that, and what happened there?
Lots of therapy, little medication, you know. Um, hey, I had, I fully believe in therapy and all of that. And I think, over the last maybe 10 or 15 years, and it wasn't really just then. I mean, even before that, I had a couple bouts of, depression, earlier, not early in my life. I mean, earlier in my professional career, but always been able to sort of manage through that. And I remember that this sort of 30-year relationship I have had with a therapist, he would always come back to the same thing. And while I might be thinking about it being more situational or relationship focused or something going on in my life, he always brought it back to purpose. And he
Mm,
said, Paul, he said, I know that there's something missing, that there's another gear in you. And as like many people in our world, we're all driven, and not just to be successful, but to have purpose, to have a reason to wake up in the morning. And so as I look back, he was always right about that. And I think that, but I went through a time, just, a couple years ago, that was the most severe. And it was a really deep depression, a clinical depression, that I went through, and ultimately, survived and came out and, feel better than ever. But it all came down to the same thing, is kind of feeling that I needed something more to drive me. And even it, resulted in the end of my marriage, and I've got children, and, is dealing with the fallout from that, has all been challenging, but it's all in, a purpose of a greater good, not only for me, but my family and everyone
yeah.
around me. And so I think it's safe to say that no matter what kind of success we have, it's not easy. It's also maybe not easy for some to be able to talk about it, but I feel there's no shame in it, right?
No.
And I remember at the Small Giants Community Summit just this last May, I shared a lot of detail about my journey with the attendees there, uh, only because I felt safe and it was okay to do. And I've received so much love and support from people. And the reality is, many people, if they're honest with themselves and others, are not maybe have gone through to the extent that I've been through it, but we all have been through things ourselves, or we know people that are. And when we talk about it, it's comforting, and we get the tools to be better about it, and we can help each other and have an even more of an impact. And so if I could help other people be able to come forward, if I could help engage in that conversation. And again, another positive that came out of the pandemic, I think, from a business standpoint, is we realize it's okay to talk about this kind of stuff at work. It's okay to talk about mental health. I mean, this idea that we have, home life and work life, I've always felt was a misnomer for years. There's, this idea of balance, like it's
Yeah.
just life.
It's life. Yeah.
They're just connected. So work family, home family, of course, we want to have some level of separation and all that, but we're all in this together. We're connected 24/7. And so the best relationships we have, whether they're personally or professionally, are ones when we can be ourselves. And so I found that in the Small Giants community. So I have no issue talking about it. But you're right. But I started out our conversation by saying that the sense of and the search for purpose never ends. But I think that's going to drive me until the end, whenever that comes.
Yeah. You mentioned your therapist over a 30-year period had always said, Paul, there's this sort of missing gear. And is that something that, for you at least, you're always kind of looking to find in that in purpose? So that might change over time, but it's kind of being aware of looking for that, or finding some kind of sense of purpose in what you're doing.
That's right. I mean, I think that it's very hard sometimes to identify or articulate. I mean, if when you're 20 something, it's hard to figure out what that is. It's, the people that get it figured out really early, good for them. I couldn't. It sort of came
Yeah.
to me over many years. And I've been, fortunate to have run a successful business and started a few other things and and now I think my purpose is just spreading the word, right? And trying to get other people to lead in this manner, trying to have an impact in whatever I can touch. But I think what drives me is the sense that I can do more.
Yeah.
There is more. There is that additional gear, and I'm challenging myself to see what can I do to take advantage of the opportunity I've been given, the blessings I have to say, if I can touch one more person, if I can help someone else, whether it's in their career or, working on some new projects now and, help really young people learn to have these really well-rounded and fulfilled lives, and then that's going to drive me. I just came from Los Angeles visiting my 97-year-old dad, who still, I asked him, I said, Dad, what brings you joy now? Right? He's 97 years old, and every day he reads for 4 or 5 hours and listens to opera all day long. And I call him and every day, and he'll tell me, yeah, I just got finished working out. But I was visiting with him in person. It was just like, hey, it's you and your brother. Like, it's the family that's around me.
Yeah.
It's just listening to beautiful music and reading and learning more about the world and eating good food and working out. And I'm going, man,
So
you are my
perfect.
hero.
Yeah.
Like, and if I could feel that sense of joy and purpose at that age, that's why I live today. And so, when you have a great example like that, I want to live up and make him proud of me as well.
Wow. That's such a beautiful story. And just, it is about the simple things in life. And I mean, just before we started, I've just spent, I was talking about taking a holiday with my kids, and had three of them. I similarly went through her divorce and have had those ups and downs in terms of trying to find purpose, and probably mild bouts of depression as well. But, it's just spending the time with family and being connected to them. And as I was saying to you earlier, my daughter came to me this past week and said, hey, here's a photo of Small Giants, and your daughter, your son, and my three children sitting around the table in San Francisco, I think at our second Small Giants event. And it got me kind of thinking about this conversation we're having today, and what's the advice you would be giving our two eldest, Jordan and Courtney, are coming out of university now. And there's so much going on in the world and so much change, and kind of reflecting on our conversation and purpose. What's some of the advice you'd be sharing with young people like them and the young leaders that you mentor all the time?
It's a great question, John. I spent a lot of time with my daughter Jordan, from that picture, and who's now 22 and
Yeah.
graduated from college and just started her first job. And I give her lots of advice, but she doesn't listen to it. So you might experience a little of the same thing. But I'm going to keep at it. And the things that I talk about with her are a couple things, because I see the stress that she's having in just this first job, and the desire to please her boss, and the imposter syndrome she has, and just trying to figure life out. And the fact that her first job has nothing to do with what she's just spent 4 years training for and learning in college, and all of that, and her watching her friends who are already in six-figure jobs, and all of that, and her feeling intimidated by all of that, and all that to say you're going to be okay. You're going to be okay. Realize that most people change multiple times.
Yeah.
Like I said earlier, I didn't figure my thing out for many, many years, right? I changed my major. I changed careers. I changed multiple times. So I ultimately settled into a business that took 10 years to even make any money, right? So there's something about letting life come to you,
I love that.
to
Yeah.
having good values.
Yeah.
Put your head down, work hard, and realize that no matter where we are in life, the only thing that matters is the relationships that you have with other people, with your family, with your friends, with people that have had more experience than you. And whether it's our employees, our customers, no matter what, it's just about relationships. So I talked to her a lot about just forging those early relationships, being curious, asking questions. I already know, because their mom did a wonderful job raising these two kids as a stay-at-home mom. They've got great values. They work hard. They are driven to do well. But it's not about money. It's about finding purpose and having an impact. And you're going to do that by building great relationships, showing curiosity with other people. And it's not about how many friends you have or how many people you know. I mean, as you know, and having exited a business, and I knew, we had lots of people that were our friends, but then we exit a business, and all of a sudden that world gets much smaller.
Yeah.
And you realize that in my case, all you have is your family, and maybe on one hand, a few really close friends that are very special to you. And the rest, we all, it's not bad, but we all, there's sort of something in it for us. Like we're selling something to each other. We want to transact something. The number of super close and intimate and genuine relationships we have is very small. And the key is to cherish those, knowing that anything could happen at any time, and life is just too short. But I think that what I see young people doing, a good part is that they want something more. When people say, oh, they're fickle, they're going to jump from job to job, and oh, they can't figure out what they want. It's good for them. Wait until you land somewhere that treats you well, that values you, that gives you an opportunity to learn and grow beyond money. They want more than that, and I love that.
Yeah.
But they also feel, I think, and I've seen this in my daughter, tremendous pressure from their peers to know right now. And they say, oh, they're going to be in the top accounting firm and they're making all this money. And I said, look, I guarantee you in 3 years, I'm not going to be doing the same thing. And you can't compare yourself to others. You're smart. You make a great impression. You know how to work hard, and those things are going to pay off over time. But there's a little bit of a lack of patience, and that's the thing that I can't seem to convince her of, to slow down and realize it's all going to be okay. So I think that if I could give any advice, it's to find those early mentors, build
Yeah.
those relationships, ask for advice. And there's almost anybody who will share, who's had experience, because we all want to give back and we love to share. When people ask me to help them, I mean, I'm an N of one. I mean, all I have is my own experience, but I've been around a long time. And so chances are I've seen most things that they're going to go through, and I can at least provide a perspective and I can listen. And there's many people just like that. And so that's the kind of advice I would probably give to a younger person today.
Slow down, enjoy the journey, and stay curious. And
That's right.
find the place where you fit. And I think that almost goes full circle back to what you created with Beryl. Was for a lot of people, when I think back to those words you said earlier, they'd come out of environments where they weren't happy, and you managed to create that in Beryl. I know it's difficult giving advice to our children, but I find you sort of give a little bit back off, and it comes back sort of
That's right.
eventually. Hey,
Yeah.
Dad.
Yeah. In the moment, you get no
Yeah.
satisfaction, but they heard you. They heard you. Yeah.
Fantastic, Paul. I really appreciate you coming on today. I've How do people get hold of you? What's the best way? Is it through Small Giants, LinkedIn? Um,
Yeah, all of that. Yeah, my email is paul@smallgiants.org. Happy to chat with anybody. I'm on LinkedIn and all those places too. So happy to help any way I can. And it's a pleasure talking to you as usual, John.